Part 2. It began with Rome and Britain. Christianity began in Palestine, but without the Roman Empire it would likely have ended there as well. Long before Jamestown, despite occasional persecutions, the Pax Romana and Roman polytheism meant Christians could travel and proselytize freely throughout the empire. That included England. Claudius invaded and conquered England in AD 43. Christianity soon followed. We don't know the first time a Christian set foot in Britannia, but there is decent evidence the church was active in England from at least the late 2nd century. And when Rome left Britain about AD 407, 1200 years before Jamestown, the church stayed. No question it was a hard row to hoe. Post-empire, England had dissolved into small pagan kingdoms and suffered invasions by other groups of pagan Angles, Saxons, and Danes, and others. Still, over time, tribe by tribe, kingdom by kingdom, Christianity won out. There was an intentional strategy: convert the local king or warlord, make the church the official religion, and the rest of the kingdom would follow. This was slow and painful, but it worked. By the 10th century AD, Roman Christianity was the official religion for all of Britain and Scotland. The church was always separate from the monarchy. There were frequent disputes, but for the most part they worked in tandem. The Archbishop of Canterbury answered to the Pope, not the local kings. The church was generally not taxed by the crown. It had its own separate legal system, and the monks did not answer to the king's justice. Mind you, this was true everywhere in Europe. The church had a state-enforced monopoly on spiritual life, and like any other irreplaceable monopoly, the church got rich and powerful. Those cathedrals, after all, cost money. England was invaded and conquered for the second time in 1066 AD, about 500 years before Jamestown. Now you might think the Norman conquest would change the church. It did not. There were changes at the top. With the Pope's approval and help, William replaced the archbishops of York and Canterbury, as well as some of the bishops, with Norman clerics, and in the process, the church got richer. We know this because in 1086, 20 years after the conquest, William commissioned a survey of everything in England, all the land, everything right down to the pigs and horses. That inventory, called the Domesday Book, still survives. That shows the church owed somewhere around 25 to 30% of all the arable land in England. But even as he did that, Western civilization was changing. The long, still ongoing transition from a biblical, Christian-based worldview to an objective, secular worldview was beginning. It was not smooth. A biblical worldview was and still is in our Western DNA. The conflict between that and a secular reality worldview resulted then and now in people holding what looked like completely contradictory beliefs. As just one example, consider Isaac Newton, 1643 to 1727, one of the greatest minds ever, who discovered the 3 laws of motion, and who also believed in both astrology and alchemy, and who was also a devout, though heterodox, Christian. The transition to a secular worldview started around the 14th century, 200 years before Jamestown, with the printing press and the Renaissance. It was about that time we began to see new ideas in technology, such as the beginnings of science and mathematics, gunpowder and paper, the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, and the discovery of the Americas. The conflict between those facts and ideas with the biblical worldview fanned the idea of freedom of thought and conscience. And then Martin Luther showed up. On October 31, 1517, 25 years after Columbus and 90 years before Jamestown, Luther nailed his 95 Theses to Wittenberg's castle church door, and the Protestant Reformation was on. Luther was the Protestant equivalent of Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. His rebellion against the Roman Church spread like wildfire across Northern Europe, and his ideas spread as well. Now, a core Protestant belief is that all truth is found in the Bible. Luther exclaimed, "Scripture alone is the true Lord and Master of all writings and doctrine on the earth," which is still a foundation of Protestantism today. This meant that every man had a right to study the Bible in his own language to figure out divine truth for himself. That means, of course, freedom of religion. That Protestant Reformation fragmented Latin Christianity into 100, then 1,000 separate Christian sects, each with their own version of Christianity, and each strongly convinced that they, not the government, was the correct theological decider. Inevitably, the Reformation got to England, and Henry VIII in a bad mood.